Former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode: Faith, Failure, and Redemption with Gane.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson. It's Created in the Image of God, episode 109. Tonight, we will be competing with the women's Olympic gymnastics team, at least here in America. They're airing upstairs. The rest of my family is watching. Simone Biles and Jordan Childs and the others. I won't spoil it for anyone who doesn't know the outcome. But hopefully, tonight's show will be valid competition for that show. And we have a very special guest for you tonight. His name is Gane, and he's got an amazing journey. The topic is Chrysalis, Awakening to, or this is his book, Chrysalis, Awakening to God's Path, Protection, and Power in Your Life. This is Guy's second book. He's written 3. He's working on the 4th. But Guy has an amazing story of faith, failure, and redemption. Let's welcome Guy into the studio.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. Was really enjoying the chat we had right before the show about a variety of topics, but now we're going to dive into you. We're going to learn about your early years, and we'll let the story unfold as we go through the show tonight, and hopefully the guests will be as inspired as I have been to know a little bit about your story. So, Guy, we always start with your creation story, your origin story. What were the forces that shaped you before you were consciously taking charge of your own life? You know, your parents, the environment you grew up in. Tell us a little bit about those early years.
Yeah, even though my last name is Gane, my family name is Iovanishi. We are Italian. My mother was born in Italy, and my dad was born right after my grandparents came to this country. So have it on both sides of the family. But I was an only child. My mom, unfortunately, had lost a couple of children before I was born. And I became the center, if you will, of my parents' attention, which, even though that sounds great, it wasn't so great because they were very, very strict with me. But, I grew up actually near Niagara Falls, between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. My dad was a World War II veteran, as many of the fathers of the guys that I hung around with back in those days. Most everybody's dad had been in the war. For me, I was really very blessed because we had a very, very large family, extended family. And I was able to really interact with my cousins, and, it was just a ball. I mean, sometimes, when I get together with my cousins, we talk about, there's a part in The Godfather where they're having the wedding right at the very beginning. And it reminds us all of what we were like when we were kids, because we would get together, and children were welcome at weddings back in those days. And some of them were outside. Many of them were in fire halls. Some of them were in banquet halls, but it was always a fun treat to be with everybody. But as I grew up, my hope actually was to become an attorney. And I was going to school. I was working at night. I was working midnights while I was going to college. And a defining moment, really, I thought about this actually earlier today. I remember I worked at a chain company back in those days, and that actually made chains, and they made industrial chains and anchor chains as well. But I'm a piano player. And one of the guys that I was working with on midnights actually had lost his fingers on one of the machines, and it petrified me. I was stunned. I was never a guy that wanted to work in a factory, but like I said, I was going to school. I needed the money. But after that incident had happened, it just so happened my dad and I had gone to a financial seminar. And as we were sitting in the seminar, the presenter had said that they were looking for agents, and if anybody was interested to make an appointment for an interview. Well, my mom and dad, all of their lives, had wanted me to go to college, as I did too. As I say, I wanted to become a lawyer, and actually I wanted to become a criminal attorney. which is kind of ironic as the way things worked out later on. But anyway, I went for the interview. I got the job, and I held my breath when I went home and said, Mom and Dad, I'm going to take a year off. That proverbial take a year off, but I promise I'm going to go back. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I never went back. I started making money. And when I first started in the business, Wade, the Dow Jones was at 577. Today, the Dow is at 40,000. So I dated myself. But I enjoyed the business tremendously. It was a great career. And it was funny because as a young guy, some of the older people wouldn't take me serious and said, well, what do you know? You're just a kid. As I got older, I always tell people that I think the sweet spot of being a financial advisor is the age of 50, because the younger people can relate to you as, kind of somebody that knows really what they're doing. And the older folks look at you as somebody who's been around for a while. But my career actually spanned 34 years. And again, I just totally enjoyed it. I decided back in the early 90s to start my own firm. And I had been in the business for years at that point, had a lot of clients, a lot of the clients that had followed me. I had actually been to a couple of different brokerage firms. And, when people wonder why their broker, if this happens, that they were at a firm and then they went to somewhere else. Unfortunately, a lot of the big brokerage firms like to cut the commissions on their brokers. And the reason is that they feel that the brokers are making too much money. There's more money to be made, for the firm itself if they cut the commissions. But I think that's kind of one of those things that they cut their nose to spite their face, because they end up losing good people. But anyway, in the early 90s, I decided to start my own firm. And by the year 2000, I had moved into a much nicer office space, had a lot of clients at that point. But what I had done was a little bit.
Let me slow you down a little bit, because I know a little bit about this, but probably a lot of our guests don't know this world, right? So you had to get like a Series 7, and then you have to get a broker's license. How complicated is it to start your own firm?
Today the exams are much more difficult, I believe, than they were when I took them. They're on the computer. When I took it, I did it by hand, and it was an all-day course or all-day exam. But you're right. Series 7 is a full brokerage license. A Series 24 allows you to have a principal's license, which means you can have your own offices. And you need those things to own your own firm. So is it difficult? I don't want to sound egotistical, but yes, it is very difficult. And you have to take continuing education, as a lot of careers are today. You have to take continuing ed. And I think that's very, very good, because it keeps you up on the rules and regulations. Not if I answered your question, but
yeah, no. And so tell us a little bit about fiduciary responsibility. And I know this will come into play later. What are these regulators doing? What are they looking for?
Yeah, they changed the laws a few years back where you have to be, if you're dealing with a client, you have to act in their best interest. I kind of found that when they changed that law, or not changed it, but they enforced that law, we've always been in a fiduciary responsibility with a client. You never want to do a bad thing for someone. I mean, that's not why you're in the business. And if you do, you don't end up in the business for very long. Right. One of the things I was very, very proud of is the fact that all during my career, I never had a customer complain. I had a very personal relationship with my clients. And it wasn't until the end, which we'll talk about, where things, kind of went hairy. But so many brokers, unfortunately, get a complaint, and some of them are not well-founded. Other ones are very much so. But, it was one of the things that I always took a lot of pride in, that I always tried to do the best job for my clients. But again, as I said, Wade, I had a very, very personal relationship with my clients and really kept in touch with them. And I can't stress this enough for the people that are in the business, whether you're in finances or selling insurance or whatever. If you keep in touch with your clients, and I'm not talking about, hey, Fred, I got this new product, let's talk about it. But just a call, and I used to call every quarter, at least every half a year, but I tried every quarter for nothing else than to say, hey, Fred, how you doing today? How's your family? What's going on? Hey, have a good day. And the thing is that I became a person that they could relate to, because it wasn't that they were going to roll their eyes that every time I called was to sell them something, or the only time I got a hold of them is I wanted to, see if I could make a buck on them. That was not the relationship I had with my clients. But I think it's really important that when you're in this business, it's a very sacred trust to have. And actually, even clients that had run out of money, they had spent everything that they had, they would still come back in and ask me, Mr. Gane, could you fill this paper out for me? Or, I had one client who had continued as a client, but she had a problem with her furniture and asked if the new furniture that she bought, if I could help her with that. So I know that sounds kind of corny, but it was the kind of relationship that I had with people.
Well, let's talk for a minute in this opening segment, and then we'll transition here in a minute. But I want to contextualize this: the world you grew up in, the Italian community, large families, weddings, the Dow at 540. Let's talk for a moment about the American dream, right? And I'm thinking now, again, Italian, I'm thinking about Billy Joel and his song Allentown. Now, that's a different industry. I don't know if you know the song Allentown, but there's a line in there that goes, every kid had a pretty good shot to get at least as far as his old man got.
Right.
But something happened on the way that place. They threw an American flag in our face. And I remember that song Allentown, kind of a pivotal moment. The economy's in the doldrums in the 70s. We've got high inflation. The hippie euphoria is kind of burning out, and the hangover of hate the man, you got to stick it to the man, is beginning to divide this country around, haves and have-nots in competition with each other, rather than a social contract in which we all believe, as Billy Joel said, every kid had a pretty good shot to get at least as far as his old man got.
Right.
The American dream. So how does this all play into your arc, your story as we move through your life? Think back to those days, and wasn't that just common? We all had the same goals and aspirations, and everybody believed in the American dream, no matter what your circumstances.
Yeah, it really was. My dad worked at General Motors. It was the Chevrolet motor plant in Tonawanda, New York, and he started there in 1938. Left to serve during World War II, and they had given him credit for the time that he was gone. So a lot of guys that I was growing up with, they went to work at the father's place of business. At this particular location, you could really only get in if you knew somebody, and my dad certainly could have done that. But I didn't want to work in a factory. I ended up working in a factory anyway, when I was going to college. But I knew it wasn't a career that I wanted. And I was afraid when I was working at the chain company, I would hear guys talking about, Mike was here for so many years and he left, he'd been retired for a month and he died. Or, this guy worked here for 30 years and I thought, oh Lord, this is not what I want. But again, my goal at the time was to become an attorney. So, but I think really what happened, Wade, is that American dream kind of got pushed aside as the late 60s went, got 68, 69. I remember, as many of us do who are my age, the riots, the college campuses were going crazy at the time. Vietnam was just horrible. I mean, everything that was going on at the time. And we could really spend hours on that particular subject, as you know. But even in high school, I mean, that was always a very, very big part of, of our lives, because we were going to get drafted, possibly. I just happened to miss the draft when I graduated. My particular year, actually the year after I graduated, when they had a standby draft. And my birthday, I would have actually gotten called. And I did want to go in the service.
We must be very similar in age, because I also came into that window of not being drafted.
Yeah. And, it was one of the things that I actually wanted to go. But being an only child, my mother, I actually was going to join the Marines and had gone down to the recruiting center. And even though I was going to college, they were encouraging me, the recruiter, to finish school and go in as an officer. But I was anxious. I wanted to go. And I'll never forget that my mother, again, remember, I'm an only child, actually, and my mom being Italian, and her theatrics, pleading with me and crying, you can't go, you can't go. So anyway, my life took another course, and of course, I ended up in the financial field.
Well, we're going to get right into that here in a minute. We did have a glitch. We were going to have a video for Guy's book, but actually a death in the family, which we'll get into here in a minute as well, led to us not having that. So we're gonna play a video actually for my book, but you're gonna get a copy of one of my books. But you're gonna get a copy of Guy's book if you engage in the chat and he likes your comments. Guy's book is Chrysalis: Awakening to God's Path, Protection, and Power in Your Life. Guy's second book is a truly inspirational rationale that achievement is a divine right granted to each of us, proving that with God, all things are possible. When we come back, we'll learn about how Guy's life took a turn dramatically for the worse, how his American dream turned into a nightmare, and we'll pick up the story right there. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Guy Gane on Created in the Image of God.
What do divorce, kidnapping, ancient prophecies, and the collapse of the Soviet Union have in common with the music of the Beatles? These are all elements of author Wade Franson's traumatic autobiographical journey, recorded in his best-selling book, The People of the Sign. He effortlessly weaves these elements together, proving once and for all that truth really is far, far stranger than fiction. Order your copy now on Amazon or by emailing orders@soupllc.com.
Welcome back. In the absence of having a trailer for Guy's book, I thought, well, I'll go ahead and share mine because we both have traumatic backgrounds in a completely different way. Mine, I was kidnapped in a domestic kidnapping as a child, smuggled out of the country, separated from both parents for two years, 2.5 years from my mother in total, in a case that went to the Supreme Court of Sweden before it was ultimately resolved, and it wasn't really resolved at all. The underlying situations weren't understood or dealt with, and that was just the beginning of a long, strange trip. But we're here to talk with Guy Gaines and about Guy Gaines tonight. So, Guy, you then had your own brokerage firm, and everything was going hunky-dory for a while. Tell us what happened next.
In 2003, the rules and regulations in the securities industry changed somewhat. And the reason that they did is there were companies, actual mutual fund families of companies, that were allowing big money managers to trade after the stock market was closed, after hours. The stock market here in the U.S. is open from 9:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had a very unique job. Once I started my own firm, I started actually managing money in a very unique way. I was unique at the time. I did not charge my clients a commission. I charged them a fee to deal with them. And even though I could never promise, as no broker can, that will make you money, what I could promise is I would not charge the client a fee unless I did make them money from year to year. And of course, it was up to them if they wanted to stay with me for another year. But I used primarily to do this mutual funds and variable annuities. And up until 2005, we had the capability to move the money back and forth between growth and money market or whatever it was. If somebody was more conservative, they wanted to stay in bonds or whatever, depending on the risk tolerance that their client wanted to take. I was managing that money on a day-to-day basis. Up until this time, my average was between 70 and 90 moves a year. It was fine to do. There was no fees. There was no charges by the funds. The only fee that the client had was my management fee, which was 2%. And then that went down depending on the amount of money that was involved. I could deal with clients that had a very, very minimal $500, as well as I had clients that had well over $10 million. So the thing is that it really just depended on what the client was looking to do and then how I was going to help them. In 2005, because everything had really come to the forefront, in 2003, it was found out that these companies were doing that. The industry was changed. We could no longer transfer money back and forth. Some of these funds gave us 10 times a year, some as many as 15 times a year. and there was no way I could do a good job for a client at that point. I had 33 employees. I had offices throughout the country, and I had to let people go. It was either that or I had to think of something else. I vacationed in Maine, up in the state of Maine, and had been going there, really all of my life. I had a place there that I would stay every summer. And this one particular year in 2005, as I'm walking along the beach thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to let people go or whatever. Um, what had happened is I happened to notice a house that was for sale as I was walking along the beach. Well, this house had been for sale a few years prior. And as I kept walking, I thought, well, the house has got to be worth more than it was when I looked at it. And as I kept walking, I thought, well, any house along the ocean is going to be worth more. They always appreciate. And then I thought, well, even lakefront property, well, even canal front property, even creeks, what I started to think is that no matter where you were, if there was water involved on the property, it was going to increase because the people, for many, many reasons, love to be next to the water. And as I kept thinking about that, I thought, maybe this isn't a bad idea, that I'll find a real estate investment trust that deals with waterfront property. And I can give my clients, who I really can't manage anymore, at least give them the option of maybe putting money into that. So I went back to the house later that afternoon, and I went on the computer to look for some of these companies that do that. And I couldn't find any. And I thought, well, I didn't come up with this idea. There's no way that happened. But I went back when I went back to Buffalo, where my main office was, and I spoke with some of my folks there. Everybody thought, wow, this is a really good idea. I ended up speaking with a couple of investment bankers, and they loved the idea. So, long story short, we decided to form a new company and start a real estate investment trust. Unfortunately, what happened, one of my partners had said, we're going to need to raise money for our company to keep things going. That we weren't going to have to let people go. I knew better. I had that little still small voice that said, don't do that, but I did it anyway. And he also suggested, why don't we have the brokers, talk to their clients, and we'll give them a commission to do that. Another mistake. And I agreed to it. And what happened is I came to find out, and again, I'm shortening the story for time's sake, but I came to find out way too late, unfortunately, that a few of my brokers, 3 of them had been misleading and lying to the clients to get their money and ultimately to get the commissions, to be blunt. What had happened is the government came in 2008, actually, and I had no idea what was going on. They were in our offices for hours, taking documents and computers and so on. And the next day, all of my employees in the Buffalo office were there. The next day, when everybody came back in, I said, look, we're obviously under investigation. I said, we're all going to get questioned. I said, whatever you do, tell the truth. I said, we have nothing to hide. Well, at that point, I didn't know that we didn't have anything to hide. And a few weeks later, I found out that indeed this had been happening with a couple of these brokers. When they were questioned, as every one of us were, they said, well, Mr. Gane told me to say that. And I had found out from one of my other brokers that the 3 of them had gotten together and got their story straight. And the government came after me as time went on and accused me of instructing my employees to lie and to mislead the clients and steal their money. And, I say this to people, Wade, that if the government would have said, look, Gane, it was your company, you're in charge, it's your responsibility. And I would have to equate that to the ship that runs aground. The sailor doesn't get in trouble. The captain does. And rightly so. He's in charge. My problem is that I took my eye off the ball. I got so busy as the years went by that I did not oversee my employees the way I should have. Now, I do some business consulting periodically for different companies. And that's one of the big things that I tell business owners. You can delegate all you want, but at the end of the day, you're the guy that's responsible. Right. And you better have, if you're delegating, you better have meetings set up with the people, the management that you have, that their employees are reporting to them, or their, people that are reporting to them are doing that. Because I didn't do that. I was traveling here and there and going in different directions, trying to get things set up. The clients actually that had invested in our company for operating expenses actually had gotten documents stating that that's exactly where the money was going. Unfortunately, by being misled, a lot of these people never looked at the documents, and they thought, in fact, that their money was being backed by real estate, and we were also looking and talking with university in the state of Maine to do dormitories for them. That was in the beginning stages, and that was
what was the year that the I don't know if it was FBI,
no, it was the
SEC,
postal inspectors. It was the postal inspectors.
What was the year in which that investigation happened, or that it came to light and you were investigated? What year was that?
Yeah, the date was it's in my memory. Thursday, May the 15th of 2008 is when they came in.
2008. Wow. So this is right before the big short, right? The big economic collapse. So at that time, I was working at Countrywide, CFC, right? Countrywide Financial Company. I was doing strategic planning for them. I used to ride up and down in the elevator with Angela Mazzillo. I don't know if we talked about this piece or not.
You did. When we originally spoke, you did.
Yeah.
You told me about this.
So anyway, when the investigation happened and these brokers were telling their story, were they getting preferential treatment for turning in the guy higher up? Because they always want to go as high up as they can. They always want to take down the people at the top, and rightly so, because to your point, and by the way, before going to work for Countrywide, I worked for Deloitte Consulting. And when I was at Deloitte Consulting, I worked for some of the top companies in the nation. And Deloitte Consulting is a financial and accounting firm. And they're also a consulting firm that deals with technology and management. We also, at that time was Sarbanes-Oxley, right? Which was the rules that were put in place. I call it to pierce the Teflon layer, which means to put processes in place so that the people at the top can, in fact, be held accountable, right? Because you had Enron, you had WorldCom, right? Back in the day, and you had the collapse of Arthur Andersen as a result, and many partners, kind of like rats jumping from a ship, fled Arthur Andersen and joined Deloitte while I was there. And I saw some things which I'm not going to get into now because they're big, powerful people, and I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in trouble. But I saw some things around how people at the top deny accountability, how they get around Sarbanes-Oxley, right? How they are playing games that should be, front page Wall Street Journal, SEC violations in stock price manipulation, in order to, provide fat bonuses for stock price performance, right? So you get a very large company, and the people at the top do have the capability of doing things on paper with moving things around to get a short-term gain in the stock price. And depending on what their business objective is for that year or that quarter, that, that 5-year contract that they have, they can cause a short-term gain that will put a lot of money into their pocket.
Right.
While damaging the underlying health of the company. It's just an aggregate of what you're saying, whereas certain brokers in your company were able to make a short-term gain for themselves by lying to customers.
Right.
But ultimately the whole company was brought down. In your case, your story, which I believe, was you were hung out to dry as a result, and you were not directly responsible. But I appreciate that you're taking responsibility as the captain of the ship.
That's the way it was. Had the government come to me and said, Gane, this is the way it is, you're responsible, I would have pled, because that's very true. I mean, I was responsible.
Right.
Unfortunately, what the government did is they started the narrative. And of course, you cannot, when you're under investigation, you are in dangerous territory starting to talk to the newspaper on your own. Anything you can say, or anything you say, can and will be used against you. Because I did have a member of the media, a reporter, came into my office about a year later. And it was ironic because the government did not close my offices. They left everything open, which I thought was a little strange. If I'm, this bad person that they're portraying, why are you leaving the office open? I couldn't do any stock business anymore. that was over. But we had some other businesses that we were trying to, keep going. But in any event, the thing is that I was not able to talk to this guy. I wanted to. I desperately wanted to tell my side of the story, but I
Yeah.
didn't dare.
Right.
And eventually, a couple of years later, I ended up getting indicted. And I passed, and I think I spoke with you about this before. I passed 2 polygraph tests. I'd taken one with the traditional wired up one, and I also took a voice stress analysis, which, from what I understand, was something that the CIA and FBI routinely use. But in any event, the thing is that I want to say at this point that the folks that said what they did, and pointed the finger to me, I hold nothing against anybody. And this is not just empty words. I don't hold any anger to anybody, because a drowning man will drown the person that's coming to save them. And even though I kept telling people, tell the truth, I just didn't know what was going on. But I was responsible. At the end of the day, it was my responsibility to know, and I didn't.
Wonderful. I mean, I love that, especially when you get into the spiritual teachings, right? Not only are you saving your own spiritual health, right, to put it mildly, by loving your enemies and forgiving those who wrongfully use you and spitefully accuse you. There are just deep repercussions of actually living out those mandates at a spiritual level. And of course, you've woven these things into your work and your books. So let's just quickly wrap up this segment by giving the summary result of all this. So you were indicted. What was the outcome? What was the court case like? What was the sentencing? And we'll wrap that up quickly in a minute or two, just to summarize it all, and then we'll come back and go from there.
Yeah, I about 1.5 years later, I got sentenced, and I got the proverbial key, thrown away. The judge gave me 13 years, and in federal prison, and I was stunned. I was stunned that I got that kind of time. And ironically, as time went on, when I was in prison and I had a chance to talk to my case managers, they themselves were stunned at the amount of time that I had gotten.
What year was the sentencing?
I got sentenced in September of 2011.
So do you think that the economic meltdown and the fact that they weren't able to take, Angelo Mazzillo got off, right?
Yeah,
when he was in his criminal trial, I think he ultimately, had civil penalties, but many of the big guys got off. Everybody had this feeling that and whatever their intentions were, whatever their criminality was or wasn't, they participated in a massive reallocation of wealth away from millions of upper middle class people into the coffers of the wealthy through a whole variety of circumstances and situations, some legal, some illegal, some ethical, some unethical. And everybody was angry and wanted something done.
Absolutely. And remember, Wade, that, now, as I mentioned before, the government came in May of 2008. A few months later, in December of 2008, as my case was just beginning to move, who ended up in problems with Bernie Madoff.
Right. Good old Bernie.
And when that happened, financial guys were really not looked at very favorably. Again, we know with the mortgage crisis and everything that happened, Lehman Brothers going out of business, the economy nearly going extinct. And we were looking.
When I was at Countrywide in the Calabasas headquarters, there was a trading floor beneath that headquarters, 200 people creating the proverbial sausage, where they were selling off the risk to the proverbial pension fund in Norway.
Yeah. It was really tough. It was a tough time for my case. I mean, it was never going to be an easy time, but it was a tough time for my case. And, what had happened is I ended up getting 10 standalone articles in the newspaper about me. And it was brutal to look at because, people kept saying, don't read them, don't look at them. But I was inquisitive. I wanted to see what was being said. And I mean, the things that were written were brutal, and not to be able to talk about it, not be able to defend yourself was very, very difficult. But Wade, before we end, I do want to tell you that, and I don't know that we talked about this before. When I was going through all of this, I kept trying to get the government to release some funds so I could get a lawyer. They wouldn't do it. And I had people spit at me, literally spit at me, push me around. I was a beaten animal. I was a guy that was a very confident, gregarious person. And I went from that to just loathing myself. How could I have let all of this happen? And reading the articles and knowing the things that were going on. And I don't blame the public. I mean, they reacted to what they were reading. How can I blame them? How can I blame the victims? I mean, these people that lost money with my firm, they were absolutely, they should be upset. I don't blame them. But the thing is that what people never knew, which is the government never announced this. The day that the government came in, attorneys I had gotten permanent funding. All of those clients would have gotten their money back. Right. The attorneys were calling that day to facilitate this transaction. Of course, the individual that was going to buy a portion of the company, which was in lieu of getting the permanent financing, he was no longer interested. Could you blame him either? But the thing is that was never mentioned. I kind of thought that was interesting. The government never said anything.
Yep. Well, that's a good segue. So you were sentenced to 13 years. Again, mm-hmm. to cut to the chase, you served 9 years ultimately.
Right.
We're going to talk about the next chapter of your life when we come back after this commercial break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Guy Gane on Created in the Image of God.
Philip Yancey's gripping memoir, Where the Light Fell, unravels his transformative journey from a strict southern USA upbringing to a life devoted to grace. Amidst a church portraying God as a stern enforcer, Yancey humorously labels himself in recovery from a toxic experience. Early encounters with contradictions led him to explore through books, challenging his upbringing, and eventually questioning his faith. Yancey's return to faith unfolds gradually, marked by encounters with a world different from his teachings. Resonating with millions through bestsellers like Disappointment with God, his memoir reflects on this journey as a prequel, tracing his evolution from fundamentalism to a life dedicated to unraveling Christianity's deepest mysteries. Brace yourself for a captivating book that promises reflection and inspiration. Where the Light Fell by Philip Yancey. Available now.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. We don't have Philip Yancey on the show tonight. He was here a few months ago now, sold over 15 million books. That was a wonderful, wonderful show. I thought that might be an appropriate ad to share because there's a certain amount of grace through the trials that you had, Guy. So when we right before the break, we learned that you were indicted, sentenced to 13 years in the heat of the economic meltdown, the Bernie Madoff scandal. Perhaps you were swept up a little bit in the dragnet, but as you mentioned, justifiably so in a way, given the circumstances of your firm. Let's start in this segment just by briefly sharing a little bit about what it was like in that federal prison and how you transitioned from the shock and then the self-loathing to where you're at today.
Well, when I reported to prison, that was in October of 2011. And when I walked onto the block, I was stunned as to the complete confusion and mayhem. And I thought, dear Lord, I'm going to be here for 13 years. What am I going to do? How can I do this? And that night, and I don't care how tough everybody thinks they are, you go to prison, you have the first night. And I don't care how many times somebody has been a repeat offender, if they end up going to prison, there was a first night. And that first night, what we didn't talk about earlier is that I had a heart attack shortly after the government came in, actually a couple months later. And I actually had died. They brought me back with the paddles. And what had happened is that first night I laid there and I was doing everything I could not to lose it. And I actually laid on my rack and I cried. I put my shirt over my face so nobody would see it. I was 11:30 at night, and a lot of the guys were already sleeping by that point. And I got to tell you, Wade, I called God every filthy name that you could think of, and I've related the story in other places. And I kind of joked that I'm surprised that God didn't, strike me right then. But I kept saying, "You had me. You and I are the only one, Lord, that knows the truth. I mean, really knows the truth. My family did, and the people that knew me, most of the people that worked with me." But, I said, "You and I know the truth. And I died and you brought me back to this." And so it just went on from that. But I really do think that that was the beginning of my healing, that I was able to get that out. And I didn't blame God for my misfortune, because as I came to find, as I studied, I really studied very, very hard. How do these things happen? What we don't want to happen ends up happening. What we do want, it rarely happens. But in any event, as I say, I really started to heal, I think, after that night. As time went on and I had the opportunity to speak with my case manager, she was shocked. I had a lady and she was just stunned at the sentence. She said, "I've never seen anything like this." And I actually started defending the judge. She said, "No, no, no." She said, "I'm telling you, I've been here for years. I've never seen such a thing." But it is what it is. So, how can you complain? I do want to mention, though, a couple of days after I had first reported, I had to go to medical. And the doctor that was there, had looked at my file, because I had my records sent to the prison. And he said, "I noticed that you had a heart attack." I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, I'm a cardiologist." He said, "I've retired." He said, "But I do contract work for the government every now and then." He said, "I noticed that they brought you back with the defibrillators." I said, "Yeah, they did." And he said, "Everybody thinks that they work all the time." He said, "They work less than 2% of the time." I said, You're kidding. I didn't know that." He said, "Yeah." He said, "But I'll tell you, Mr. Gane, God has a special plan for you." And I remember when he said that to me, I said, "Yeah, I got 13 years. He said, "No." He said, "God's got a special plan for you." Now, I'm not saying this because I'm special by any stretch, but I always remembered that, because I thought, what, maybe there is something here. And what I had done is, from really about that time, I put a scripture verse on top of my locker. I ended up going to 4 different places while I was in prison. But on top of my locker was a scripture. It comes from Romans 8:28. And what it says is, "All things come together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose." And, I kept looking at that and thinking, what good can come out of this? I mean, you got to be kidding me. But as time went on, and I can't say I enjoyed prison, because I certainly didn't. You got to remember, I was with rapists, I was with child molesters, I was with murderers, I was with people that were white collar people, I was with the worst of the worst as well. So, but I got to know human beings. I got to meet people that I would never have met. And, as time went on, as I was getting more and more acclimated to what the world was really like, one that I had never seen, I started opening up my eyes. And I was able to deal with people and talk with people that, really gave me an insight into human beings. A funny thing, about a week after I had gone to prison, I met a guy who was in organized crime. And he was Italian, of course. And he said to me that my nickname used to be Gino, still is actually. But he said, "You're Gino, right?" I said, "Yeah." And, we talked for a little bit, and, I told him a little bit about, my family, and told me a little bit about his. Well, I came to find out that this particular individual was the true shot caller in this prison. There was 2,000 people in the prison I was at, but this was the top guy. I didn't know that. And I found out months later that, of course, once these guys, and there was a bunch of them there, once these guys found out I was Italian and I was not there on a sex offense, which, unfortunately a lot of people were, I found out months later that they had put the word out I was not to be touched. So I had guardian angels there because of my background. But in any event, as I said, I was transferred a few times, and I started thinking I should write a book. And I had spoken with that about that with a couple of the guys, And they kept encouraging me, you should write, you should write. And it was something that I had always wanted to do, actually, before any of this had happened. And I don't know if your viewers or your listeners are familiar with the author Wayne Dyer, but I actually had a chance to meet Wayne Dyer some years before, back in the 90s. And I actually asked him, I said, do you have any suggestions on how to write a book? And he said, the best advice I can give you is just sit down and do it. And, well, great. That's what kind of advice is that? But really, that was good advice. And of course, he knew what he was talking about. But what had happened is, when I started writing Chrysalis, which was the first book that I wrote, I had no idea, where do I start? You kind of get that, writer's block, and where do I even start with this thing? But, it was really funny, because as I was thinking about what kind of a book I wanted to write, it really was something that had to do with God's will. And how does this whole thing work? As I mentioned a minute ago, how is it that the things that we don't want to happen in our lives show up, but what we want in our lives rarely does? And it was from that premise that I started. And I came to realize that God gives us free will. I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful thing when you think about it, because, God loves us whether we love him or not. And as I went through this premise of free will, I found out that you either live by God's will, or you choose the life that you want and he allows it. So I found out that it's much easier and better to live by God's will than it is by your own. But, as I started writing this book, Wade, I had no idea where I was getting these ideas. I mean, they were really starting to come fast and furious. And I'm thinking, where's this coming from? And, it was funny, because I was, referring back to scripture, and talking about, different things in that nature. And I'm hearing the filthiest language that you could possibly think of. I mean, sitting in the bowels of prison, you can imagine the talk that would be going on around me. But as I kept writing, I would think, I'm not doing this. And ultimately, what I came to find out from my own self is that I wrote about 20% of Chrysalis. And I certainly am not trying to equate myself with some supernatural being that angel dust came down on me. I can only tell you the truth. And the truth is that things were coming to me that I had no idea about. And
inspiration. It's inspiration.
It's exactly
Everyone can accept that you're inspired to write the book.
Right.
What people want to interpret or not interpret into that word.
Right. That's exactly right. So it took me 2 years to write. And as I researched different things, what I would find is that some of the things that I had written really were kind of the way they were, from what I found out in my studies. And it was funny, because in prison, you're always shaken down. People hear about that, as I'm sure most people, if not everybody, has seen the Shawshank Redemption, and they talk about, and other prison movies, getting shakedowns and everything, where things would come, where guards would come in and take your private belongings. You don't have much, but it was miraculous, because I had, my notes were taken, pictures, photos that my family had sent, magazines that I had. You can't keep a lot of things, but miraculously, that book was never touched. And, I kept thinking, oh my God, what if they take this? By this point, I'm almost done with it. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? But I thought, well, if they do, they do. And what can I do about it? But it never was touched.
Well, we won't have time tonight to go into the depth of it, but share with us, unpack for us the word chrysalis in the title.
Yeah, Chrysalis, again, that was something else that was given to me that I had no idea. I was sitting in church, actually, one night, and because I was trying to think of a title for the book. I was done with the book at this point, but I thought, what do I call this? And this particular night, I wasn't thinking about it at all. And I heard the word Chrysalis, Awakening to God's Path, Protection, and Power. I thought, wow, it's a pretty catchy name. But I wasn't sure what a chrysalis was. I thought I knew, but I wasn't sure. So when church ended, I ran down to the library, looked in the dictionary, and it was absolutely perfect. Because what a chrysalis is basically the cocoon that the caterpillar goes into and comes out as a butterfly. And I thought, what better title for this book than somebody who has been, through the ringer, and other people. I'm not unique. All of us have problems, but how do you adjust from having problems to turning into something else? And I thought that the title was perfect.
Wonderful. I want to share a quick soundbite too for our Baha'i friends on the Baha'i channel listening into this. And it's the Baha'i wedding vow, right? For a Baha'i wedding, very simple. You talked about the Italian wedding. In a Baha'i wedding, the vow that the husband and wife exchange is simply this. Each of them simply says, "We will all verily abide by the will of God."
How unique. That's very profound.
We will all verily abide by the will of God. You don't have a choice, even if you go the other way. And if you, I mean, you do have free will, and this is a fascinating discussion in its own. We've had philosophers and theologians and others talk about free will on this show. We had the president of the Freedom from Religion Society who believes there is no free will.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, I thought he would go the other route and say those who believe in God, can't possibly accept the fact that we have free will, but he himself thinks we don't have free will. I think we do have free will, but ultimately all things are done within the will of God.
Because God allows. That's the thing I found, is that you either follow God's will or he allows it. It's only one of the two things.
Yep. And it all does work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. We're all called according to his purpose. Jesus said many are called, and by many he means everybody. Everyone is called of God. There's nobody that God doesn't call, right? But then it says few are chosen, because at any given time, most of us are not listening to that call. Even those who strive to listen to that call have a hard time always listening to that call, and we go our own way. We're heedless, make mistakes. But anyway, we're going to now go to a break, and this will be the switch between going into the audience comments. So when we come back, we're going to go into some of those comments from the audience. Those of you who have been commenting, keep that up. We'll circle back and visit some of the things you've said, and get them in so that you can get a copy of Guy's book. I'll throw a copy of mine in there as well. And we'll be right back with the concluding pieces, engaging with you, the audience, right after this right after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
To Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
This is Wade France, and we're back with more of Guy Gaines. Guy Gane, you told us earlier that you'd met Dr. Wayne Dwyer,
Right.
and his advice was just start writing that book. Well, Something or Other Publishing may be somebody who can help you with that. We're proud to be associated with them and wanted to show that ad. So now is the chance to engage with the audience. I don't know, Guy, if you can see to your right. We do scroll on a number of platforms, and we aggregate their comments here in the studio. I'll just showcase a couple that appeal to me. You can also, if you're looking at them, call out any of them. You're from Stock Guy right at the beginning, talking about your strict upbringing. They appreciated it to a degree. So we didn't really comment much on that early upbringing, other than that it was happy for you. But you talked about that strict upbringing, and do kids today have that same thing? Are they missing out?
I don't think that kids today are as looked over as maybe we were years ago. Although, yet on the other hand, I have to say that, with my children, when they were going somewhere, I was driving them. I think today as parents, we hover around our children. We hear all of these horror stories, and we don't want that to happen to our children. And yeah, my parents were strict in the respect that I had to be home at a certain hour. At the dinner table, I had to act a certain way. There were boundaries that you did not cross when I was a kid, because there was punishment for that. I came from a tradition that if you needed a paddling, you got it. Today, I mean, I remember seeing a few months ago, a joke about, I basically how children are handled today. I'm going to give you a SWAT. The other one was, well, honey, you got to have a timeout and just think about this and how it goes. So I wish I had the joke there in front of me, but I do think that today things are much different.
Well, and I don't think it's a joke. And though I'm a bit older than some, I also have younger children than most people my age. We've got a 13 and a 16-year-old, and so most people my age would have grandkids that age, right? So I'm from that same generation, and yet I'm raising kids today. And I would go even further and say that those helicopter parents hovering over their kids, they're overprotective, right? Back when you were a kid, it's like if something bad didn't happen when you were out of line, something bad happened when you got home. You suffered the consequences of your actions. You made mistakes, and you learned in the school of hard knocks.
That's right.
Kids today are overprotected from anything possibly ever happening, and they're growing up with all kinds. And I'm no psychologist, but they're growing up with all kinds of anxieties. They're on medication. They've got mental health issues. They're overprotected. They're not exposed to reality that would be strengthening their muscles, strengthening their immune system, strengthening their emotions. No gain without pain. And we're protecting kids from every conceivable form of pain, including emotional trauma, right? To a degree that, in my opinion, makes them susceptible and weak in a whole host of ways. And they actually, to your point about we get the thing we don't want, the thing that we're trying to protect our children from, we're basically guaranteeing that they're going to have it in spades for most of their life.
Well, what I think is kind of strange is that a team that loses, they get an award. Everybody on the team gets an award. I mean, that's kind of crazy. I mean, it doesn't really facilitate individual effort or recognize the person that, really was outstanding on their team or whatever. I find that a little strange, but that's me.
Yep. Well, here's another comment. This was actually at the point in our conversation where we were talking about the economic meltdown. I believe it came in when we were saying that there were a lot of actors and agents and people in various positions of wealth and privilege in the economic system that were benefiting from everything that was going on in these boom bust cycles, right? And I'm not sure if UP Monster, and if you want to add another comment in there, what is intended here, but is this the division within the country? The polarization that's getting more out of hand with the haves and have-nots, judging each other and fighting with each other, or is this talking about the aggregation of extremes of wealth and poverty? But either way, what are your thoughts on this, Guy?
I hate to talk about politics, but I'm going to just touch on it for a second, but not in the way that I'm going to say, well, I like this person and I don't like that person, whatever. At the end of the day, we are all Americans. And I don't want people to forget that. We are all Americans. If some other country attacked our country, we would all come together with that. We've seen that. I believe that they would. Remember 9/11? I mean, people were flying flags on their cars. I mean, we are a country that was founded almost 250 years ago, that the Declaration of Independence was signed. At the end of the day, we're a family here. And people in a family, I mean, and I think everybody can identify with this. We can talk about our brother or sister, or we can get mad at our mom and dad, but we sure don't want other people to do that. At the end of the day, we're Americans, and I don't think we should forget that. I don't care where your thoughts lie or who you like better or whatever. Again, remember that we are all one country, and I don't want anybody to forget that, because you know what, Wayne? I'm a history guy, and what I'm seeing right now breaks my heart, and I'm not being facetious. What I'm seeing right now is prior to 1860, and if anybody knows what happened back in those years, it was before the Civil War. We get to a point where our opinions diverse so bad that we don't have any commonality anymore. We've got to come back and realize that we're one country and we're one people.
Yep, and UP Monster did join in and said yes, it was the division in the country, the polarization in the country, but also that yes, both of the things that we were talking about made sense. So, tell me a little bit about and this actually leads into next week's guest, because what you may not know and the audience doesn't know is we're going to be embarking over the next couple of months on a deeper exploration on the spiritual principles around equity, around finance, around how to establish an economy that actually serves the people. We'll be diving into some holy writings. We'll be getting different perspectives on this. So I thought it was an interesting, launch pad to have you on the show today, Guy, who was in that world of finance and went to prison for it. So how have your views changed on the subject of, let's say, capitalism? You know that famous statement from that movie, greed is good, and you got the Bernie Madoffs, and you've got this famous quote. Actually, it was. I'm convinced it was that this quote came from Warren Buffett, and that he had it scrubbed off the internet. That's just my opinion, that he didn't want to be quoted, because I know I wrote an article about this quote from him. Now maybe it was a misattribution, but I can't even find the quote anymore. It's been scrubbed, but the quote was, "Trickle down economics works. It's just that the rich have found a way to plug the leaks," right? In other words, when you're in a position of power, guess what? And you're creating wealth, a rising tide does lift all boats.
Absolutely, it does.
And when you're in the wealth management, wealth preservation, to your point, you're serving people who only have a few $100s to invest, and you're serving people who have millions to invest. I was so pleased, actually, when my kids came home and they said, "Somebody was talking to us about investment, Dad. Can we get a 401k going?" And I'm like, right. Yeah, you really should at your age. You should really think about putting away a few pennies, a few dollars now, because anyone in America can get rich,
right?
Slowly. Lots of people want to get rich quick. That's dicey. That's risky. It's fraught with all kinds of hidden dangers and wrong thinking,
right?
Gambling, risk taking. But in this fabulously wealthy country, I don't care who you are. I don't care what degree of privilege you have. It's been proven over and 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 over. I could go on for an hour now, over again, with every conceivable identity, every conceivable socioeconomic stratus, every conceivable, origin story, wherever you come from, whatever color, creed, belief, aside from some self-limiting beliefs you might have, right? But wherever you come from in this country, you can get rich slowly through hard work and applying yourself. That doesn't work when you begin to doubt, when you begin to blame other people, when you begin to think the system is so stacked against you that you couldn't possibly succeed. Sure, right. You might have it tougher than the next guy, but who said we're supposed to not compare each other? Jesus said that, and Paul the apostle said that, and said, "You who compare yourselves among yourselves are not wise. Be careful that you do not devour one another." Paul the apostle said on this topic. What's my point here, right, is that we live in this fabulously wealthy nation, the richest the world has ever seen, creating a better standard for the middle class and even the poor than any other nation on earth ever. But still, despite all that, we're not there. We haven't figured it out. There are dark pockets, there are problems, there are challenges, there are inequities. The rich do get rich, the poor do get poorer, for many reasons. How have your views changed on this over time?
You know, after everything happened, I was not able to stay in my business any longer. You mentioned a minute ago about 401ks. For a long time, people, including in prison, by the way, the staff in prison, were asking me, Gane, what should I do? I mean, I'm losing money. I was actually helping manage some of these guys' money. Now they're retired, so I'll say that. So I'm not going to get anybody into trouble. I had 8 different staff members that were asking me for opinions and asking me to manage their accounts for them. The thing is that when I came home, I had people, at home saying, what should I do? What's going on with the market? What do you suggest? So what I did is I started a few years ago writing a newsletter, which I publish every week. But the people that I did that for were not the ultra wealthy. Most people, not all, but most people never hear from their broker, or if they do, it's very seldom. In my book, Manage Money, An Avenue to Wealth, which is the 3rd book that I had written that came out last year. That's an ebook, by the way. But in that, I gave all of the recipes, if you will, of how I managed money and how people in plain English, in the way I wrote it, can manage their own money. But the thing is that where I changed is that I realized that as I was doing my money management, as I was a registered investment advisor, as well as being a stockbroker, but as I was doing that, I realized that most people that came to me weren't hearing from their broker because, either the broker wasn't getting enough money from them, they had too many clients, whatever the case may be. So I was kind of like that Statue of Liberty saying, give me your tired and your poor, and that was happening. But remember, as you just mentioned, I was managing people that had just a few $100s, as well as people that had millions of dollars. The thing is that I could do that because when I moved one client, I moved everybody, and they knew that. Those people agreed to that before, they became a client of ours. The thing is that where I see everything right now, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly the way you want, but I am concerned about the economy over the next 12 months. If people have ever seen a light bulb before it burns out, it gets a little bit brighter. Now, this is not meant to scare anybody because there's always opportunities no matter what happens. If you'd have bought stock back when the markets collapsed or nearly collapsed in 2008, you'd be doing very, very well right now. But my method of money management was to take a small loss as opposed to taking a large loss. When I would do my seminars, I would ask our attendees, if you had $10 and your account went down to $5, what do you have to make percentage-wise to get back to the $10? And people would raise their hand, well, 50%. Well, no, that's not true. Because you're starting at $5, you've got to do 100%. So the thing is what I would say to them, it would be a lot easier to make up 1 or 2 or 3% as it would be to 20 and 30 and 40 and 50%. So when people subscribe to my newsletter every week, they know what happened with the market. They can see what happened previously. And I also give advice as to where they should place their money. Also, when they should pull money out. And the thing is that to know what to do, when to do it, even if you're not hearing from your broker. And this is the thing I wanted to mention about the 401ks. Brokers themselves usually, and I'm saying usually because I think it's not, they just can't manage that money for you. If you're working at Target or Walmart or someplace, that you just don't even know what you're doing, you sign up for this 401k, you put money into this fund or these funds because the name sounded good, and you don't know how to read anything. You don't understand any of that stuff, and you just let it ride. Well, hopefully the market continues to go up. But the thing is that what you want to do is protect as much of your profit as possible and build on that profit. And that was the whole idea I had when I was managing money, build on that profit instead of taking big losses. You have small losses and you keep as much of the profit as you can. Again, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I look at money much, much differently than I did when I first started the business.
This will be an ongoing discussion. I just want to caveat that. So I agree with you 100%. I think we are approaching some very turbulent times. It's my personal opinion, and I'm not giving any financial advice with that. My point was simply, I'm glad my 13 and 16-year-old started thinking about saving, investing,
Right.
compound interest, and long-term returns. That's the beginning of the journey, right? There's much to be learned about making wise decisions, but the first biggest wise decision is don't spend it, save it, right? Because we live in a world where from the time before they could even think, they're being trained to be consumers, to put
Right.
money in somebody else's pocket by giving into their desires, desires which are fed, grown, and encouraged by constant advertising and manipulation to
Right.
think you need this, you need that, you need that
Oh, yeah.
$8. You
Yeah.
need that $8 cup of coffee every day when you're
Right.
14. And
Yeah.
that's like 80% of your disposable income for the month. You're going to
Right.
spend it on high-priced coffee because you're taught you need this,
Mm-hmm.
right? You follow me? That's the point I
Yeah.
was making. The first principle is think about your long-term future, think about compound interest, think about storing up for the future.
There's two things I want to say, if I could. Einstein was asked at one time what he felt the greatest invention that mankind had ever had. And he said compound interest. He really said that. The other thing I'd like to say, in relation to your children and really anybody listening, if, as a financial advisor, I always would tell people, put 10% away for yourself. Take that, pay yourself first was what I used to say
Right.
many years ago. But take that, if you're earning $1,000 a week or $500 a week, whatever the case is, take 10% of that and put it away. Because, with what you said earlier, it's possible over a long period of time to become wealthy. As you had mentioned, it takes time. But if you put 10% of your income away, and people say, well, I've got bills, I can't do that, I've got this, I've got that, you're paying yourself for the hard work that you're doing. Now, maybe people can put more than that away, but if you get into the habit, especially when you're young, of putting 10% away, habits are pretty tough to break, as we know. And if you can get into that habit of doing that, you're going to accumulate some money as time goes along.
Yep. And here's a comment from Linda Lindsay. Believe that every dollar needs a spiritual purpose assigned to it. And so, yes, absolutely. And this is a great segue into next week's show. What I will say in response to this comment is that I love, Guy, that you said invest in yourself or save it for yourself. You should become a giver, not a taker. But if you can't provide for your own financial security, you will become a taker, right? Other people will have to support you if you don't learn how to take care of yourself. And the only way you will be able to take care of yourself is if you're saving some money, putting it aside, and taking care of your own financial future. That's the only way you will become a tree whose branches extend out over the wall, benefiting others beyond yourself.
Right.
So that in itself, that alone is a spiritual purpose.
Right. In the Bible, it talks about tithing. And it's, in Proverbs, it talks about tithing. In Joel, it talks about tithing.
And in Malachi, bring in the tithe to the storehouse and see if I don't open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that's too big for you to receive.
And one of the reasons that is the case is because you believe that you will get even more coming back to you, because you're believing that God will provide for you, and you have total belief. We could get it. This could be, and I'm sure, as you said, with some of the segments you've got coming up, that topic will be covered. But that is so big, is that people realize that when they're tithing, they're giving money away, as you mentioned. Much more is going to come back to you. Do good, it always comes back.
Amen. And that's a great point to end on, but there may be something else you've left unsaid that you'd like to share as we roll out the trailer for next week's show and wrap up tonight. Anything else you'd like to leave everybody with?
One thing, and this is really for the people that own a business. One thing that I had to learn much the hard way is that be friendly with your employees. Be there for them. You don't need to be an ogre, but do not become friends, because the decisions that I made and should have made, pretty harsh ones, I couldn't do because these people were friends. And some of the people that this had happened with me, I really should have let go before, but I just couldn't do it because I was their friend. They were my friend. And I would just say that I would want to leave it at that, that if you own a business, be friendly. Do not become friends with your employees. Do not become friends. And as I mentioned earlier, I do business consulting. I don't do a lot of it because I'm busy with some other things. But those folks that I deal with, I tell them that all the time. Do not become friends with your employees, because you will probably make bad decisions because of it. And you don't want to do that. Again, as I say to people, it's easy to know how to start a business. It's what you don't know in the business. And those are the things that, I tell people. I've been the guy that's been there and done that. But my whole ministry, my whole purpose is to take years off of people's learning curves. And that's one of the things that I really stress, is that just be careful who you're giving that friendship to, especially an employee.
Thank you, Guy. Is there any particular comment that jumps out at you that you'd like to award a copy of your book to?
Anybody that has sat and listened to us is welcome to get a book. I think that these are people that are interested in hearing what we had to say.
Is there somewhere we can point them to learn more about you and your books? While I have you answer that, I'm going to put an email address in for people to email us to get that copy, but go ahead.
Yeah. My website is Gane Wisdom. That's Gane wisdom.com, ganewisdom.com. My email address is guy@ganewisdom.com. And my books are available, all three of them, on Amazon as well. Chrysalis, Unchained and Unbroken, and also Manage Money.
So email info@soupllc.com for a free copy. Go to Gane Wisdom. Did I spell that right?
Yep.
.com. And what was your email address?
It's guy@ganewisdom.com.
All righty then. And let me just share with the audience and with you, Guy, who's going to be here next week. We've got a little trailer. I think everyone's going to be excited by this. Hang on.
To sharpen your vision of the economy beyond your wildest imagination. Introducing Divine Economy Model by Bruce Korber, a book that escorts you through a very human way of building subjective models. These models are visual, logical, and conceptual. They acknowledge the complementary nature of human intellect and spirituality in all human action. Will you be able to grasp these economic models? Absolutely. You will feel as if you are building the models yourself. They fit into your imagination every step of the way, making logical sense while surprising you with new insights. To say that you've never experienced anything like this before is an understatement. Since when have you encountered a qualitative model of the economy that captures purposeful, spiritual, human action? You will suddenly recognize how intimately connected we are and how the economy empowers us as individuals and fulfills our social nature. The four models presented in this book, macroeconomics, microeconomics, ethical economics, and economic justice, are cohesively bound together. Divine Economy Model by Bruce Korber. Get your copy now at Amazon.
And for those of you who want to go ahead and order that book in advance of next week's show, there's a QR code you can scan in. Well, Guy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here tonight. I think we will want to have you back to dive in deeper to your experiences, to dive in deeper to your work. I hope you'll follow us as we unfold over the next 2 months, really, a series of programs around the balance between, the spiritual life that we all are called to live and this material world in which we live. And how we can be the change we want to see in the world through how we behave, the businesses we construct, the way we treat our employees, as you just brought out. I'm actually really quite excited about some of the guests we have lined up, and you were just a fabulous one to kick that all off with. I hope you'll continue to be involved, and we'll probably want to have you back on to comment on
Sounds great.
this as it unfolds.
I'd be happy to do so.
Wonderful. Well, so everyone, next week, same place, same time, with Bruce Kerber, Divine Economy Model. But Guy, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm going to put your QR code out there again for your book. And if somebody doesn't want to wait, or you just want to go get it, you can use that QR code to get it off of Amazon, or you can reach out to Bruce through his website, through his email, and connect with him and continue on this journey together. That's a wrap for tonight. See you all here next week. Going to go check out how that Olympics team did, even though I already know. Maybe we'll see some highlights, and look forward to seeing you all here